The massive ships appeared without warning in Earth's orbit on a quiet Tuesday morning. They hung in the sky like dark mountains, blocking the sun over major cities and casting long shadows across the land. People stopped in the streets to look up. Car accidents happened as drivers forgot to watch the road. News channels around the world interrupted their broadcasts to show the same images. Joe Carter sat in his office at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, a cup of coffee frozen halfway to his lips as he watched the main screen. As Admiral of Earth's small space fleet, he knew this moment would define his career, and possibly the future of humanity. "Sir, we're getting readings from the objects," said Kate Morgan, his communications officer. Her fingers moved quickly over her screen. "They're massive, each one about 3 miles long. We count 7 of them positioned over different continents." Joe put down his coffee and straightened his uniform jacket. "Any signals? Any attempt to communicate?" "Nothing yet, sir." The office door burst open and General Paul White rushed in, his face pale. "The President is calling an emergency meeting. We need to be at the White House in 30 minutes. The ride to the White House was silent. Joe looked out the window at the crowds gathering in parks and open spaces, all looking up at the ship that hung over Washington, D.C. Some people were praying, others were taking pictures, a few were crying and hugging loved ones. "Do we have any defense against something like this?" Paul asked quietly. Joe didn't answer. They both knew the truth. The emergency meeting room was already full when they arrived. President Michelle Daniels sat at the head of the table, her usual confident expression replaced by one of controlled concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began once they were seated. "At 800 hours this morning, 7 unknown vessels entered Earth's atmosphere and positioned themselves over major population centers. At 8:30 we received this transmission." She nodded to an aide who pressed a button. A screen lowered from the ceiling, and a face appeared. At least, what they assumed was a face. It had smooth, shimmering skin that changed colors slightly as it moved. Its eyes were large and completely black with no visible pupils. When it spoke, its mouth didn't move in sync with the words they heard. "People of Earth. I am Ambassador Vexnor of the Galactic Hegemony. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our domain. This is an honor. Resistance is unnecessary and unprecedented. Your leaders will be contacted with terms. Prepare for a new era." The recording ended and the room stayed silent for several seconds. "That was it?" Joe finally asked. "No explanation of who they are or what incorporation means." The president shook her head. "Nothing else. But we've just received a request for a face-to-face meeting. They want to send their ambassador to the United Nations building in Geneva tomorrow." "It could be a trap," said Defense Secretary Bill Evans. "Or a genuine diplomatic contact," countered Secretary of State Laura Rivera. "We need to show we're willing to talk." President Daniels looked at each person around the table. "I believe we need to meet them. Admiral Carter, I want you there. Your experience with first contact protocols may be valuable." Joe nodded, though he knew his experience was mostly theoretical training. Humanity had never met aliens before today. The next day, Joe stood in the Grand Hall of the United Nations building in Geneva. The room had been cleared of all but essential personnel. President Daniels stood at the center with representatives from Russia, China, India, and the European Union beside her, a showing of Earth's united response. The air in the room suddenly felt charged, and a shimmer appeared a few feet away from the human delegation. The shimmer grew and solidified into the form they had seen in the transmission. Ambassador Vexnor stood nearly 7 feet tall, his skin shifting between blue and green in the light. "Greetings," the alien said, his words translated by a small device at his throat. "I am honored to meet the representatives of Earth." President Daniels stepped forward. "I am Michelle Daniels, President of the United States and chosen speaker for Earth today. We welcome you to our world, though we have many questions about your arrival and intentions." The alien made a gesture that might have been a bow. "Of course, the hegemony has found that clear understanding leads to smooth incorporation. Perhaps you could explain what incorporation means exactly," Joe suggested, stepping forward slightly. Vexnor turned his large eyes toward Joe. Your world will become part of the hegemony. You will receive our protection and limited access to our technology. In return, you will provide resources as needed and accept hegemony governance over certain aspects of your society. What aspects? Laura Rivera asked. Military capabilities will be reduced. Some resources will be redirected. Population centers may be adjusted for efficiency. Nothing that will greatly impact daily life for most citizens. President Daniels frowned. Ambassador, with respect, what you're describing sounds like an occupation, not a partnership. Vexnor's skin rippled with colors. You misunderstand. This is not a partnership. This is incorporation. Your world has been selected. The terms are non-negotiable. The room grew tense. Joe noticed security personnel shifting nervously at the edges of the room. And if we refuse these terms? President Daniels asked, her voice steady. For the first time, the alien showed something like surprise. Refuse? That is unprecedented. No world has refused incorporation in over 300 cycles. Perhaps that says something about your terms, Joe commented. Vexnor's skin darkened to a deep purple. I will allow time for you to reconsider this response. The hegemony is patient, but not indefinitely. We will establish a base on your moon to wait for your acceptance. You have one of your months to formally agree. Before anyone could respond, the alien shimmered and disappeared. The ride back to Washington was even more silent than the trip to Geneva had been. Joe looked at the reports coming in from around the world. Panic was spreading. The stock market had crashed. Religious leaders were calling for calm while doomsday prophets claimed vindication. And above it all, the ship still hung in the sky. In his office later that night, Joe looked at satellite images of the moon. A structure was already taking shape on the far side, built with impossible speed. Kate Morgan knocked on his door, entering with a tablet in hand. Sir, we're getting strange readings from the lunar surface, some kind of energy buildup. Joe looked at the data and felt his stomach sink. They're not just building a base, they're building weapons. The next week passed in a blur of emergency meetings and sleepless nights. Scientists studied the ships. Military leaders created defensive plans they knew were likely useless. Diplomats tried to establish further communication with the aliens but were met with silence. On the 8th day after the Geneva meeting, the hegemony made their intentions clear. A beam of light shot from the ship hanging over Beijing, destroying a small military installation with surgical precision. Similar demonstrations occurred near Moscow, Washington, and New Delhi. President Daniels called another emergency meeting. This time her expression was not just concerned, it was angry. They think this display will make us submit, she said to the gathered leaders. They're wrong. Humanity does not kneel to threats. Joe looked around the room and saw determination on every face. Whatever happened next, Earth would not go quietly, and up in orbit the human ships, small and few though they were, prepared to laugh in the face of impossible odds. 2 weeks after the hegemony's show of force, Earth prepared for war. The alien ships remained in orbit, silent watchers that blocked the sun for minutes each day as they passed overhead. On the moon, the alien base grew larger, its strange structures visible through Earth's strongest telescopes. Joe Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, Earth's newest and most advanced spaceship. Before the aliens came, it had been a source of pride. Now it seemed small and fragile compared to the massive hegemony vessels. All systems check complete, Admiral, said Kate Morgan, now promoted to commander after showing exceptional skill during the crisis. The fleet is ready for your orders. Joe looked at the main screen showing Earth's small defense fleet, 12 ships of varying sizes, the best humanity could muster. They would be the first line of defense against whatever came next. Open A. Channel to all ships, Joe said, squaring his shoulders. When Kate nodded that the line was open, he spoke clearly and firmly. This is Admiral Carter. Today we stand for Earth. Our mission is to protect our home and show these invaders that humans will not surrender without a fight. Whatever happens, remember your training and remember why we fight. Carter out. President Daniels had authorized a preemptive strike against the moon base before the hegemony could fully activate their weapons. Intelligence suggested they were nearly operational and Earth couldn't afford to wait. "Set course for lunar orbit," Joe ordered. "Keep the Earth between us and the hegemony ships as long as possible. We need the element of surprise." The journey to the moon took hours. Joe used the time to review the attack plan once more. The Defiant would lead the assault, targeting what scientists believed were the main power generators. The other ships would focus on defensive systems and communication arrays. "Sir," Kate said suddenly, looking up from her screen with concern, "we're picking up energy spikes from the hegemony ships. They're moving." Joe rushed to her station. "They've detected us?" "I don't think so. They're regrouping over the Atlantic, all 7 of them." Joe frowned. Something wasn't right. "Continue, as planned, but stay alert." As they approached the dark side of the moon, the base came into view. It was larger than their intelligence had indicated, much larger. Metal structures stretched across the lunar surface, gleaming under the harsh sunlight. "Target locked on the main power station," reported the weapons officer, a young man named Ben Harris whose hands were steady despite the pressure. "Fire when ready," Joe ordered. The Defiant shuddered as it launched its most powerful missiles toward the alien base. The other Earth ships followed suit, their weapons creating a beautiful but deadly light show against the blackness of space. For a moment, Joe felt a surge of hope as the missiles closed in on their targets. Then something impossible happened. The missiles stopped in mid-flight, frozen in space as if time itself had halted around them. Then, one by one, they turned and shot back toward the Earth fleet. "Evasive maneuvers," Joe shouted, gripping his chair as the Defiant tilted sharply to avoid its own returned fire. Not all the ships were so lucky. 2 smaller vessels exploded as they were hit by their reversed missiles. "They have some kind of reflection technology," Kate said, her voice tight with stress as she worked her controls. "Our weapons are useless against it." Before Joe could respond, new threats appeared on their sensors. Smaller ships were launching from the lunar base, dozens of them, moving with incredible speed toward the Earth fleet. "All ships defensive formation," Joe ordered. "Prepare for close engagement." The battle that followed was brief and brutal. The alien fighters were faster and more maneuverable than anything humanity had built. They fired weapons that seemed to pass right through Earth's best shields. Joe watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. "Send the retreat signal," he finally ordered, knowing they had no chance of victory. All ships returned to Earth orbit immediately. Only 5 ships made it back, all of them damaged. The Defiant limped into Earth orbit with half its systems failing, and a third of its crew injured or dead. From the main screen, Joe could see that things on Earth had changed during their failed mission. Smaller hegemony ships now hovered over major cities. The ground war had begun. "Get me the president," Joe said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. When President Daniels appeared on screen, her face was tired but determined. "Admiral, we've lost ground forces in 23 countries. The aliens have some kind of paralysis weapon. It doesn't kill, but it immobilizes our soldiers. They're taking control of key infrastructure. Madam President, I recommend immediate evacuation of essential personnel to the mountain facilities. We need time to regroup and rethink our strategy." She nodded. "Already in progress. The good news, if we can call it that, is that they seem to want to avoid mass casualties. They're disabling rather than destroying." "That gives us time," Joe agreed. "We need to find a weakness in their technology." After the call ended, Joe made his way to the ship's medical bay. The wounded lay on every available surface, doctors and medics rushing between them. In the corner, Ben Harris sat with his arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale but alert. "Sir," Ben said, trying to stand when he saw Joe. "At ease," Joe said, putting a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You fought well today." "We all did, sir, but it wasn't enough." Ben looked down. "My brother is in Cleveland. They say the aliens have taken the whole city." Joe squeezed his shoulder. "This was just the first battle, not the war. We'll find a way to beat them." In the weeks that followed, Earth's resistance continued but struggled. The mountain facilities became command centers for what remained of Earth's military. Scientists worked around the clock to understand the alien technology and find weaknesses. In one such facility, deep under the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Alan Wright led a team studying captured alien equipment. He was an older man with wild gray hair and a reputation for brilliant but unconventional ideas. Before the invasion, his theories had been dismissed as too radical. Now, they were Earth's best hope. The key is in their shield harmonics, he explained to Joe during a briefing. They follow patterns, complex ones, but still patterns. If we can identify and reverse those patterns, we could penetrate their defenses, Joe finished, feeling a spark of hope for the first time since the lunar disaster. On the other side of the room, a young scientist named Olivia Scott was studying data from the battle. "Admiral," she called suddenly, "look at this footage from the Defiant. During the battle, one of our missiles almost hit its target before being reflected." Joe came over to see what she'd found. The screen showed a slowed-down recording of the battle, focusing on one missile that had come closer to the base than the others. "What made that one different?" Joe asked. "It misfired," Olivia explained. "Its guidance system failed, and it tumbled. The trajectory was erratic instead of predictable. I think their reflection technology works best against objects following expected paths." Joe looked at Dr. Wright, who was already nodding with excitement. "Randomized attack patterns," the scientist said. "Combined with reverse-engineered shield frequencies, it could work." For the first time since the alien ships appeared in Earth's sky, Joe felt real hope. They had found a possible weakness. Now they needed to exploit it. Meanwhile, on the occupied moon, a small group of human colonists had avoided capture. Led by a former mining foreman named Frank Diaz, they hid in abandoned tunnels and watched the aliens build their base. Day by day, they gathered intelligence and sought ways to fight back. Earth would not kneel. The battle had just begun. 4 months after the failed attack on the moon base, Earth was a changed world. The hegemony controlled most major cities. Their tall, shimmering soldiers walked human streets, and their strange machines replaced human factories. People lived under strict rules: no large gatherings, no weapons, no resistance. But beneath the surface, humanity refused to accept defeat. Deep in the Rocky Mountain facility, Admiral Joe Carter looked at a map showing resistance cells across the globe. Small groups fought back in different ways. Some gathered intelligence, others sabotaged alien equipment, and a few even managed to steal hegemony technology. "Admiral, you need to see this," said Kate Morgan, entering the room with excitement in her eyes. She carried a small metal device that pulsed with blue light. Dr. Wright's team just finished testing the prototype. Joe followed her to the large underground lab where Dr. Alan Wright and Olivia Scott worked with a team of scientists. The lab was crowded with equipment salvaged from various research facilities before the aliens could take them. "It works," Dr. Wright announced when he saw Joe. The old scientist looked tired but happy. "We've created a working shield disruptor based on the frequency patterns Olivia discovered." Olivia stepped forward, holding another of the blue pulsing devices. "We've confirmed it can penetrate hegemony shields at close range," she explained. "It creates a randomized energy field that confuses their defensive systems." "How close?" Joe asked, hope rising in his chest. 50 meters, Olivia admitted. "Not ideal for ship-to-ship combat, but perfect for guerrilla tactics," Joe finished. "How many can you make?" Dr. Wright ran a hand through his wild gray hair. "With our current resources, maybe 100. If we had access to more rare Earth elements, which the hegemony is mining from the moon," Kate added. Joe thought for a moment. "We need to get these to Frank Diaz and his people on the moon. If they can disrupt operations at the source." Planning. The mission took another month. Earth's remaining ships were too damaged or too closely watched to make the journey to the moon. Instead, they modified a small transport vessel to look like a hegemony supply ship. Using designs stolen from alien databases, they created a convincing copy. Ben Harris, now recovered from his injuries, volunteered to pilot the mission. "I've studied their flight patterns," he told Joe the night before launch. "I can mimic their movements." "This mission is vital," Joe said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, "not just for the disruptors, but for establishing direct contact with Diaz. The intelligence he's been sending is good but fragmented. Ben nodded seriously. I won't let you down, sir. The next day, Joe watched from the hidden mountain hangar as the disguised ship took off carrying Ben, 5 resistance fighters and 20 shield disruptors. The rest would be distributed to resistance cells on Earth. As the ship disappeared into the blue sky, Joe turned to Kate. Time for Phase 2. Get me the resistance leaders. Over the next week, Joe coordinated with resistance groups around the world. The plan was simple but dangerous. Synchronized attacks on hegemony power stations in 12 major cities, using the shield disruptors to get past alien defenses. Meanwhile, on the moon, Ben's ship managed to land without raising alarms. The disguise worked. Hegemony drones scanned the vessel and registered it as one of their own. Once night fell on that section of the lunar base, Ben and his team slipped out and made their way through service tunnels based on maps Frank Diaz had sent. After hours of careful movement, they reached an abandoned mining shaft where Diaz's resistance fighters were waiting. Frank Diaz was a tall man with dark skin and strong hands, shaped by years of mining work. He greeted the Earth team with firm handshakes. Good to finally meet face to face, he said to Ben. Your Admiral's plan is bold. Will it work? Ben asked, looking around at the small group of resistance fighters. No more than 30 men and women who had survived the initial hegemony takeover of the lunar colony. Frank smiled. We've been studying their patterns for months. They rotate guards every 6 hours. They check equipment every 12. They're efficient but predictable. One of Frank's people, a woman named Susan Clark, who had been a lunar security officer before the invasion, spread out a hand-drawn map on a makeshift table. We've identified 3 key targets, she explained, pointing to different sections of the alien base: their main power generator, their communication array, and their shield emitter. Hit all 3 simultaneously and we'll create enough chaos to do some real damage. Ben handed over the shield disruptors, showing them how to use the devices. Remember 50-meter range, get close, activate, then strike fast. The next day, as Earth's resistance groups prepared for their coordinated attack, Frank's team made their move on the lunar base. Split into 3 groups, they approached their targets during a shift change when attention would be divided. The shield disruptors worked perfectly. When activated, they emitted a field of changing energy patterns that confused the hegemony shields just long enough for the resistance fighters to slip through. Frank led the team targeting the main power generator. Using explosives made from mining charges, they set a timed detonation sequence and retreated to a safe distance. Susan's team placed similar charges on the communication array, while the third team, with Ben's help, focused on the shield emitter. Back on Earth, Joe received the signal that the lunar mission was in progress. Begin Operation Thunderstrike, he ordered. Around the world, resistance fighters moved against hegemony targets. In New York, a team led by a former police officer used a shield disruptor to enter a power distribution center and disable it. In Tokyo, resistance members infiltrated a hegemony command post. In Rio de Janeiro, Cairo, Sydney, and other cities, similar actions unfolded. The hegemony was caught unprepared. They had grown confident in their shields and had not expected such a coordinated attack. On the moon, the explosions rocked the base in quick succession. The power generator shut down first, plunging sections of the base into darkness. Next, the communication array collapsed, cutting off contact with hegemony ships near Earth. Finally, the shield emitter failed, leaving the base vulnerable. Frank met up with Ben and the others at their predetermined rally point. Phase 1 complete, he said, his face streaked with lunar dust. Now for Phase 2. Using the confusion, they made their way to the hegemony landing bays. The aliens were rushing to respond to the attacks, leaving fewer guards at the ships. With Susan's help, they boarded a small hegemony vessel and used access codes she had memorized from months of observation. The ship's controls were strange but similar enough to human designs that Ben could figure them out. I can fly this, he said after a few minutes of study. Frank looked at the alien ship with a grim smile. Good, because we're taking this fight back to Earth. The stolen ship lifted off from the lunar surface, carrying Frank's resistance fighters and vital intelligence about hegemony weaknesses. Below them, the alien base struggled to recover from the unexpected attack. On Earth, Joe received reports of successful strikes in 9 of the 12 target cities. Not a complete victory, but enough to show the hegemony that humans were not beaten. As news of the attack spread, people who had been living in quiet fear began to hope again. Small acts of defiance multiplied. Hegemony patrols found themselves facing uncooperative humans instead of fearful ones. In his command center, Joe looked at the latest satellite images showing darkened sections of the lunar base. For the first time since the invasion began, the hegemony seemed vulnerable. "Sir," Kate said, entering with an urgent expression, "we're picking up an incoming ship. It's using hegemony codes but sending a human signal underneath." Joe smiled. "That would be our lunar team, and it seems they've brought us a gift." Operation Thunderstrike was just the beginning. Earth was fighting back. The stolen hegemony ship landed in a hidden valley in the Canadian wilderness. Admiral Joe Carter was there to meet it, along with Dr. Wright, Olivia Scott, and a small security team. They watched as the alien craft settled onto the snow-covered ground, its engines humming with a strange musical tone before falling silent. A door opened in the side of the ship, and Frank Diaz emerged, followed by Ben Harris and the other resistance fighters from the moon. They looked tired, but triumphant. "Admiral," Frank said, saluting, "we brought you something better than Christmas presents." Joe shook Frank's hand firmly. "Good to finally meet you in person, Diaz. Your intel has been invaluable." "Wait until you see what we found inside their computers," Frank replied with a grin. "Susan was a systems expert before all this. She downloaded everything she could before we left." Susan Clark stepped forward, holding a small alien device. Their entire command structure, ship deployments, and most importantly, their communications. "Codes," she explained. "We can listen to everything they say to each other." Joe's eyes widened. This was better than he had hoped. "Let's get this to the mountain facility immediately." The hegemony response to Operation Thunderstrike was swift and harsh. They increased patrols in cities and imposed stricter curfews. Their ships moved into new positions, covering more territory. But the coordinated attacks had shaken them, and their lunar base was still struggling to recover. In the mountain facility, Susan worked with Olivia and Dr. Wright to decode the stolen hegemony data. They set up a system to monitor alien communications, learning more about their enemy with each passing day. "They're not as united as they appear," Olivia reported during a strategy meeting 2 weeks after the lunar mission. "There are 7 different factions within the hegemony, and they don't all agree on how to handle Earth." Joe leaned forward, interested. "Explain." Susan pulled up translated communications on a large screen. "Some want to crush all resistance immediately with maximum force. Others argue that Earth has potential as a resource world and should be handled more carefully." "Can we use these disagreements?" asked Kate Morgan, who had been coordinating the global resistance forces. "Possibly," Frank said. "But more immediately useful is this." He pointed to another section of data. "The hegemony fleet isn't as large as we thought. The 7 ships over Earth are the only ones in this sector of space. The rest of their forces are spread thin across dozens of worlds." Joe's mind raced with the implications. "So if we could somehow neutralize these 7 ships, we'd be free," Dr. Wright finished. "At least until they could send reinforcements." Ben Harris, who had been studying the stolen ship systems, spoke up. "I think I know how we could do it. The ship we took uses a network system to communicate with the others. If we could create a virus—" "A computer virus?" Kate asked, surprised. "Something like that?" Ben nodded. "Their ships update their defense protocols automatically through the network. If we could insert corrupted data—" Dr. Wright's eyes lit up. "We could potentially disable their shields all at once." The next month was a flurry of activity. Dr. Wright and Olivia worked on creating the virus, using the stolen ship systems to test their work. Ben and Susan taught Earth technicians everything they had learned about hegemony technology. Frank and Kate continued coordinating resistance cells worldwide, preparing for what they hoped would be the final phase of the war. Joe split his time between all these efforts, but he also worked on rebuilding Earth's damaged fleet. The Defiant had been repaired and 5 other ships were nearly ready. They wouldn't match hegemony technology, but with the shields down they might not need to. "We're calling it Operation Freedom," Joe explained to President Daniels during a secure video call. "Once the virus is uploaded to the hegemony network, we'll have a short window before they can reset their systems." "How short?" the president asked. She looked more tired than when he'd last seen her, but her eyes were as determined as ever. "Minutes, possibly seconds," Joe admitted. "But we'll be ready. Every resistance cell has their targets. The fleet will engage the hegemony ships the moment their shields fail." President Daniels nodded. "This is our best chance. Make it count, Admiral." 2 days before the planned operation, a new complication arose. Hegemony ships began moving from Earth orbit to a higher position. "They're creating a tighter defensive formation," Ben observed, studying the sensor data. "Almost like they're expecting an attack." Joe frowned. "Did they detect our preparations?" "I don't think so," Susan said, checking the communication logs. "There's nothing in their transmissions about Earth resistance, but they are talking about something else." She paused, reading the translated alien text. Something about responding to the Zentari situation. "Zentari?" Joe asked. Olivia was already searching through the hegemony database they had downloaded. "Here it is. The Zentari are another species under hegemony control. From what I can tell, they're having some kind of uprising." Frank and Joe exchanged looks. "We're not alone," Frank said quietly. "Other worlds are fighting back too." "This could work in our favor," Joe decided. "If the hegemony is distracted by multiple fronts, they might not see us coming." The day of Operation Freedom arrived. The virus was ready, loaded onto the stolen hegemony ship that Ben would pilot back into orbit. Its programming was designed to trigger the moment it connected to the main hegemony network, disabling shields across all 7 ships simultaneously. Joe stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Defiant, watching as his small fleet prepared for battle. Each ship captain knew the SIO plan. They would remain hidden behind Earth's moon until the signal came that the virus had worked. Then they would strike quickly and without mercy. "Ben's ship is launching," Kate reported from her station. The stolen alien vessel rose from Earth, its signature masked to appear as a routine hegemony transport. The minutes that followed were the longest of Joe's life. He watched the tactical display as Ben's ship approached the hegemony fleet. It sent standard identification codes and received clearance to approach. "He's in position," Kate said. "Initiating network connection now." On the alien ship, Ben took a deep breath and activated the virus upload. The ship's controls flickered briefly as the malicious code entered the hegemony network. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then alarms began to sound throughout the hegemony fleet as ship after ship experienced shield failures. Emergency protocols tried to isolate the problem, but the virus was already spreading through their systems. "Now," Joe ordered, and the Earth fleet burst from behind the moon, weapons ready. At the same moment, resistance cells across the planet launched their attacks on hegemony ground forces. In cities and bases worldwide, the aliens found themselves under coordinated assault just as their communications began to fail. The Defiant led the charge against the largest hegemony ship. Without shields, the alien vessel was still formidable but vulnerable. Earth missiles struck its hull, causing explosions that rippled along its crystal-like surface. "All ships, focus fire on their engine sections," Joe commanded. Around him, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their months of training paying off in this crucial moment. 2 hegemony ships managed to raise partial shields. A third began to move toward Earth, perhaps hoping to use the planet as cover. The remaining 4, including the one the Defiant was targeting, fought back with energy weapons that tore through space. In the middle of the chaos, Ben's stolen ship darted between the combatants, its smaller size making it hard to target. He had one more mission to complete, delivering a message. Using the hegemony's own communication system, Ben broadcast on all frequencies in dozens of languages. People of Earth, rise up. The shields are down. Freedom begins today. As the battle raged in orbit, Joe allowed himself a small smile. Whatever happened next, Earth had proven something important today. Humanity would never kneel. The battle for Earth lasted 3 days. In space, the human fleet fought with everything they had. On the ground, people rose up against the hegemony soldiers who had controlled their cities for months. It was not an easy victory. 2 Earth ships were destroyed. Many brave resistance fighters lost their lives. But by the end of the 3rd day, 3 hegemony ships had been disabled. 2 had retreated to the far side of the moon, and 2 had been captured intact. Admiral Joe Carter stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking at the main screen that showed one of the captured alien vessels. His uniform was torn and dirty, and a bandage covered a burn on his left arm, but his eyes were clear and proud. "Damage report," he said to Kate Morgan, who had stayed at her post throughout the battle. "The Defiant is operating at 60% capacity," she replied, checking her screens. "Engine room reports they need at least a week for full repairs," Joe nodded. "And the rest of the fleet? The Phoenix and the Courage are still combat ready, the others need repairs." Kate paused, then added with a small smile, "But they'll all fly again." The communication system beeped, and President Daniels appeared on screen. She was in the mountain facility, which had served as the global command center during the battle. "Admiral, congratulations," she said. "I've received reports from around the world. Hegemony ground forces are surrendering in most major cities." "What about resistance?" Joe asked. "Still fighting in some areas, but we're making progress. The alien soldiers seem confused without orders from their ships." This matched what they had learned from the stolen hegemony data. The invaders relied heavily on their command structure. Without clear direction, many would simply wait for new orders. "What about the 2 ships that retreated behind the moon?" Joe asked. "We're monitoring them," President Daniels said. "They appear to be making repairs. Dr. Wright believes they may be preparing to leave our solar system." Joe considered this. "To report back to the rest of the hegemony?" "Possibly. Which means we need to prepare for potential reinforcements." The call ended, and Joe turned to his crew. "We've won a battle, not the war. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." Over the next week, Earth began to recover from both the invasion and the battle for freedom. Cities were rebuilt. The captured hegemony ships were studied carefully. Scientists and engineers worked to understand and adapt the alien technology. A large hangar near what had once been the hegemony's main Earth base, Joe met with the key people who had made victory possible. Frank Diaz and his lunar resistance fighters, Ben Harris, who had piloted the stolen ship and delivered the virus, Dr. Wright and Olivia Scott, whose technical knowledge had been crucial, Kate Morgan, who had coordinated the global resistance, and many others who had fought in their own ways. "The 2 remaining hegemony ships left our solar system yesterday," Joe informed them. "Our long-range sensors tracked them heading toward the center of hegemony space. Based on their speed, we estimate it will take them 3 months to reach their destination. And then they'll be back with friends," Frank said grimly. Joe nodded. "That's what we have to prepare for, but we have advantages now that we didn't have before." He gestured to Olivia, who stepped forward with a tablet displaying technical schematics. "We've made significant progress understanding their technology," she explained. "The shield disruptors have been improved to work at much greater ranges. We've also begun adapting their faster-than-light communication system." Dr. Wright spoke next. "Most importantly, we've cracked their translation matrix. We can now understand any hegemony transmission in real time, which has led to our most surprising discovery," Ben added, taking over the presentation. "The hegemony is facing rebellions on multiple fronts. The Zentari we heard about before, they've actually liberated 2 of their worlds already." This news sent a murmur of excitement through the group. Joe let it continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence. "This brings me to our next step," he said. "President Daniels has approved a bold mission. We're going to use one of the captured ships to make contact with the Zentari and other resistance movements." Frank Diaz stepped forward immediately. I volunteer to lead that mission, Admiral. Joe had expected this. I was hoping you would, Frank. Your experience with the lunar resistance makes you the ideal choice. The planning for the mission took another month. The captured hegemony ship was modified to accommodate a human crew comfortably. Its weapons and shields were enhanced using the knowledge gained from studying alien technology. They named it the Emissary. On the day of launch, Joe stood with President Daniels and watched as Frank's crew boarded the ship. 20 of Earth's best, scientists, soldiers, diplomats, and engineers, were going to seek out allies among the stars. This wasn't how I expected first contact to go, President Daniels said quietly. Fighting for our survival, then reaching out to other species who are doing the same. Maybe it's better this way, Joe replied. We'll meet as equals, all of us fighting for freedom. The emissary lifted off smoothly, its alien engines humming with power. As it rose into the bright blue sky, Joe thought about how much had changed in the years since the hegemony ships first appeared over Earth. They had faced the threat of slavery and extinction. They had suffered defeats and losses. But they had never surrendered, never accepted that their fate was to serve alien masters. And now, they were taking their first steps into a larger universe, not as conquerors or the conquered, but as defenders of liberty. 6 months later, Joe stood on the bridge of the Defiant once more. Earth had changed dramatically. Cities now featured a mix of human and adapted alien technology. The global defense system had been enhanced with hegemony shields and weapons. Earth's fleet had grown to include 10 ships based on alien designs but built by human hands. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission, Kate announced from her station. It's from the emissary. Frank Diaz's face appeared on the main screen. He looked tired but happy. Admiral Carter, mission successful. We've made contact with resistance movements on 12 worlds. The Zentari send their greetings, as do the Morellians and the Toch Collective. What's the situation out there, Frank? Joe asked. The hegemony is facing a full-scale rebellion across 3 sectors of space, and sir, Frank grinned. They're asking for Earth's leadership. Our reputation has spread. They call us the ones who refuse to kneel. Joe smiled at this. Tell them we're ready to help. And Frank, when can we expect you back? That's the other news, sir, Frank replied. We're not coming alone. We're bringing representatives from all the resistance worlds. They want to form an alliance with Earth at its center. After the transmission ended, Joe walked to the observation deck of the Defiant. From here he could see Earth below and the stars above. Somewhere out there, the remaining hegemony forces were gathering, preparing to crush the rebellions that threatened their empire. But they would find something they did not expect, a united front of free worlds, led by the planet that had shown the galaxy that freedom was worth fighting for. Earth had not only refused to kneel, it had risen to lead.